friends. Today we are going to swatch out the line of Winsor&Newton Professional Watercolors. I got their paint swatch sheet. The dots are the smallest dots I have ever seen in any kind of swatch sheet. The ones you get from Daniel Smith is at least twice as large, but we're gonna hope that I'm sorry, I have a dog that's a little bit whiny. We're just gonna have to ignore it. He lives a good life. He wants to be part of everything. We're gonna start with the yellows, of course. And like I said, the paint samples are very, very small. Hopefully, we will be able to fill each box. They are so small that I'm hoping that they will fill everything. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we're starting with lemon yellow. I'm gonna switch things around a little just so that I have their explanation for their colors around me as well. So it's an extremely permanent color. In this case, I think they mean it's not liftable because they also have the ASTM rating where this is excellent light fastness and it's an opaque color. Next up is bismuth yellow. It's a permanent color with regards to lifting. It seems to be semi-opaque and it doesn't have a light fast rating according to their own sheet. And they say that where there is no ASTM rating listed, please refer to the Winsor&Newton permanence rating. So according to them, it's a permanent color. So it's not about lifting, it's about light fastness. It's odd to me that they have sprung for a proper ASTM rating, but they don't have it on everything, and you have to kind of just rely on their house checks. Cadmium lemon yellow, opaque, permanent, excellent light fastness. Shift a light here. Cadmium free lemon yellow, permanent, very good light fastness. Also an opaque color. Winsor lemon, permanent, and semi-transparent. They don't have pigment information on these sheets. So what we're going to do is, after I've swatched, I'll go check their web pages for the pigment information and we'll go through the pigment information. Winsor yellow, permanent and excellent light fastness. That's also odd to me because they have their own rating here, their key to coding. This one has 1A, which means permanent, but it has excellent light fastness, and they say on their own sheet that if you don't have the ASTM light fastness, then you should look at their own key to coding with regards to permanency. So their test is that it's permanent, not extremely permanent, while the ASTM test is that it has excellent light fastness. So there's some contradictions. Not contradictions, but there's something that just it should have had extremely permanent and excellent light fastness. Okay, so lemon yellow deep, extremely permanent, no rating as an ASTM. So extremely permanent, supposed to be semi-opaque. This is very light. And I mean, like, you can't, there's not a lot of paint coming from that dot. Orlin, very good light fastness, permanent according to their rating, and transparent. To excuse the fact that my paint cloth is very stained, but that's what a paint cloth tends to be. Okay, transparent yellow, permanent, excellent light fastness, transparent. While I don't have the pigment information here, this looks like your pigment yellow 150 or nickel ASO. I love this. I have a lot of different nickel ASO yellows just because if I buy a set from someone now, I really want to make sure that they have this color in it because I use it so much in mixing. Okay, cadmium yellow free. No, sorry, cadmium yellow pale. Excellent light fastness. Permanent. Opaque. I used to be very kind of scared of cadmiums. My first sets of watercolor were cadmium based, and that's a hard thing to learn on, the very opaque nature of a cadmium. But now that I've been painting for some years, I really enjoy it. Okay, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna switch the sides we have things on because the yellows continue on the other side of this page. Cadmium-free yellow pale, permanent, excellent light fastness, opaque. Let's see if we can make it as heavy mass tone as possible with our little dot. One of my favorite colors now is Turner's Yellow. I don't have the Winsor&Newton one. I have Schminke and Rembrandt. Okay, so it is extremely permanent, no ASTM rating, and opaque. New Gamboge, permanent, very good light fastness according to the ASTM, and semi-transparent. Also looks like it has pigment yellow, 150, nickel ASO yellow. As its base. But we're going to find that out later. Cadmium yellow, permanent, excellent light fastness. Cadmium-free yellow, permanent, excellent light fastness. Winsor yellow, deep, permanent, very good light fastness, and semi-transparent. That's beautiful. I'm bumping into my water. That is a beautiful color though. So far apart from the things that I think is nickel laser yellow based, I think that is my favorite. The Turner's yellow from this brand from Winsor&Newton didn't really do it for me as much as some of the others. Indian yellow, transparent, permanent, and with a very good light fastness. Yeah, I really like that one too. I think something started changing in me where I went from like just enjoying your moody colors to like really, really enjoying these very bright orangey colors. Cadmium yellow deep, permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. Cadmium free yellow deep, permanent, excellent light fastness, also opaque. Much water. It's not as heavy as the cadmium yellow deep with its opacity. Cadmium orange, excellent light fastness, permanent, also opaque. Still there. Okay, reshifting to get all the way back to the other side of the paper. Let's move this. Okay. Oh, can we do this so it doesn't give you a reflection? Cadmium-free orange, permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. Happy color. Winsor orange, permanent, very good light fastness, and semi-opaque. And just to say, the brush I chose today is a Princeton Velvet Touch brush, and that's because of the small size of the paint samples. I wanted a stiffer brush, so I don't have to work as hard to get the paint. Oh, that is stunning. Transparent orange. It's a permanent color with excellent light fastness. So you have to excuse the barks. My dog, who is very sick, is getting better and is back to his favorite activity, which is barking at raindrops and weather and anything that moves in the garden. Winsor Orange Red Shade. I'm going to take a break and give him a bone. So they both have something to chew on and not bark at us. Okay, I'm back. They have both gotten a chew bone, so hopefully they'll behave. Winsor Orange Red Shade, permanent and semi-opaque. I'm gonna try to put the lighting on a little bit of a cooler shade. You probably won't see this while it's so wet, but to my eye, it looks pinkish in its undertone, and that might be because of my light settings. It's warmer light. We'll see when it dries. Cadmium scarlet, permanent, excellent light fastness, opaque. Very, very easily rewettable, and I could just see the instant it got hit with water. It just, see if I can do it from here so you can see. It just explodes into it. Very beautiful. Cadmium free scarlet, permanent, excellent light fastness, also opaque. And then we have Scarlet Lake, permanent, very good light fastness, and semi-transparent. Cadmium red, permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. Cadmium free red, excellent light fastness, opaque, and permanent. Cadmium red deep, permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. We'll see if the cadmium deep, red deep granulates. There are some of the cadmium deeps that will granulate. Schminka Vulcan Red is just a cadmium. It's, I think, they're only one pigment in the super granulating line. Cadmium free deep red, excellent light fastness, permanent and opaque. Winsor red, permanent, no ASTM rating, and semi-transparent. I have Winsor red. It's one of the few colors I have, and I have it in a Full pan, very easily to revet from full pan as well. Rose Doré is a color I've been wanting, but I haven't bought it yet. There was a period of time where everyone was painting with Rose Doré on YouTube. It's very delicate. This is the first time I'm trying it myself. It is very delicate. And I don't think it's because it's not revetting. It seems to be doing the same that the others were, which they have all been revetting excellently. But it's so delicate. Quinacridone Red is. Did I forget to go through that? I did. The Rose Doré is permanent and with very good light fastness and transparent. The quinacridone red is permanent with very good light fastness and also transparent. Winsor Red Deep is permanent, no ASTM light fastness rating, and semi-opaque. Oh, that is beautiful. Now that I tried the Rose Doré, I'm not sure if I'm seeing it. I'm not sure if that is a color I will invest in. Permanent alizarin crimson is permanent, no ASTM rating, and transparent. Also very beautiful. I never thought I would like the cool reds this much, but your taste changes as you keep working with something. Like I said earlier, I used to just really enjoy the moody colors, and it's changing into really enjoying the very bright colors. Alizarin crimson, moderately durable, according to them. Generally, the light fast rating for any real alizarin crimson is bad. It doesn't have a high light fast rating. This is a transparent color. And it's a staining color, according to them. I've been disregarding the staining. I'll remember that from now on. So permanent carmine, another permanent color from their own coding, and a staining color, and transparent. Permanent rose is a permanent color, it's staining, and it has very good light fastness, and it's transparent. Can I get it to be a little bit more mass tone here? Thank you. Rose Madder Genuine, moderately durable, according to them, a transparent color. Also very light. I'm gonna try to get more out of the mass tone. The paint sample is disappearing before my eyes, but we're not getting a very strong mass tone. So another very delicate color. Okay, we are going to Go back here, so straighten this out. There we go. Opera Rose, moderately durable according to their own scale here. It seems like they don't have any that they haven't rated. Opera Rose is, as far as I know, not even moderately durable, but just be aware if you want any of these very brilliant paints, they aren't durable. It's for anything neon-y. You won't get permanency ratings or good permanency ratings. So this is supposed to be semi-transparent. I would say it seems very transparent, but like I don't have any lines underneath here to properly check. Quinacridone magenta, permanent, excellent light fastness, and transparent. Permanent magenta, permanent, excellent light fastness, and transparent. A lot more blue in its tint than your quinacridone magenta. Cobalt violet. This might be difficult to shift because some of the cobalts, especially cobalt violet, and when we get to Potter's pink, might need more time in water. If we can't get this to shift, I'll just leave water on it and we'll come back to it. Oh, it's shifting somewhat. Not much. It's barely able to pick it up on camera. This is a granulating color. It has excellent permanency, excellent light fastness, and is semi-transparent. But you see the swatch, the sample is disappearing before our eyes, and we're not making it get any stronger. I have Cobalt Violet from Schminke, and that is a stronger color. More blue toned than this, but a stronger color. Permanent Mauve is a permanent color, excellent light fastness, semi-transparent. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't help with their shine. I'll show them all as they've dried up as well, because the water is creating a bit of a shine here. Quinacridone violet, not violent, permanent, excellent light fastness, transparent. That is beautiful. I really like quinacridones and phthalos for mixing, or even for using them in their pure form. If you want like very color intense painting, you can't beat phthalos and quins for that. Ultramarine violet, a permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating, and semi-transparent paint. Trying to get some stronger mass tone. At 60. Winsor violet, or your dioxazine violet, permanent, staining, hasn't been rated on the ASTM scale, but usually a dioxazine violet is very good light fastness, or very high light fastness. And it is beautiful. I don't have any dioxazine violets, and I might have to get one. That's very pretty. I haven't even had a sample of a dioxazine violet before, so this is beautiful. Indanthrene blue, known as indanthrone blue, Delft blue, a lot of different names. This one is usually PB60, even though they don't have the pigment information here. Permanent, semi-transparent, tends to have a very good light fastness. This is not as dark as I'm used to. Let's see. Let's get it more in the mass tone. This might be because the sample is so small, but usually the ones I have sort of darker than this, but a beautiful color nonetheless. Cobalt blue deep, extremely permanent, semi-opaque, granulating, again no ASTM rating, just their own extremely permanent rating. Get as much out of the mass tone as we can. French ultramarine, excellent light fastness, granulating and transparent. One of my favorite colors, always a staple in any of my palettes. And I find that that is kind of regardless of whether it is watercolor or gouache or now some vinyl acrylics that I'm using a little bit. I just really enjoy it, and it's a very good mixer. Smalt or Dumont's blue, permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating, and transparent. And this is the first time I'm trying one of these paints. Oh, that is very beautiful. It is a little bit more lilac, at least when you're looking at it compared to the ultramarine. That is beautiful. So I might have to buy, so far from what I'm seeing, the transparent orange, the dioxazine violet, and the smalt blue. So this is your ordinary, not French ultramarine. This is ultramarine green shade. I don't have any ultramarine green shades. They all tend to be PB29, but we'll see. I'm guessing this is going to be more cool leaning because of the green shade undertone. And it doesn't say that it's granulating. So, seeing as how they don't have pigment information on this sheet, this might not be an ultramarine. I have never been around an ultramarine that doesn't granulate. Maybe it's a phthalo. We'll have to find out. Cobalt blue is extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating, and semi-transparent. And while sometimes it looks like everything is granulating when you're painting it out, you don't really see whether or not there's granulation until they've dried. While things are wet, it tends to just pocket into the dimples of the paper no matter what, so everything looks like it's granulating. And the next one we have is Winsor Blue Red Shade, permanent, very good light fastness, and transparent. Now, Winsor Blue, most of the paints, when they have like the name and the color, it tends to be a phthalo or aquinacridone and their own mix of that. So I'm guessing that we have a red shade phthalo here. Behaves very much like that, very intense. Antwerp Blue, permanent, excellent light fastness, and transparent. After this line, we're taking a small break so I can change out the water because I don't want it to get too tainted. Is that a good word? Too affected by the other colors. Prussian blue, permanent, excellent light fastness. I think they tend to be pigment blue 27, and I think there's also been some discussion about permanency. I haven't had problems with mine, but I only have 1.5 pan. And it's in a travel box, so it's usually just used in a sketchbook, which doesn't give you a lot of testing of permanency. Winsor Blue Green Shade, permanent, very good light fastness. Guessing this is just your phthalo blue green shade. Moving the water a little before I bump it a lot. Yep, phthalo blue green shade. I also always have phthalo blue green shade in my palettes because they mix very well. Extremely strong on their own. They will overpower paints, but sometimes you just want stuff that's very bright. Cerulean Blue Red Shade. Extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating, and opaque. Very light color. Not getting a heavy or a very strong mass tone. I don't have cerulean blue from Winsor&Newton. I believe the one I'm using now is from Rembrandt, and it does have a little bit more coloration to it. Might be because it's the red shade. I don't have any experience with that one. Cerulean blue, excellent light fastness, extremely permanent, semi-opaque, and granulating. It's still very soft. I have to work fairly hard. The Velvet Touch is a stiffer brush, but I still have to work this paint dot very hard to get a good mass tone. All right. We're going to take a small break to change out the water. Okay, we're back with fresh water and starting up with manganese blue hue, a permanent, very good light fastness, semi-opaque granulating paint. Let's see if I can get some more mass tone. phthalo turquoise, permanent staining transparent color. I don't have any of the phthalo turquoises, and I really want them, but I find it a little bit hard to buy them because they should be so easy to mix. But they are beautiful, and I kind of would like to have one just so that I wouldn't have to bother with making the same mix. I'm sure everyone else who paints have had this problem that you're making the mix and you're not making enough. And then when you try to make more, you're not getting the exact same ratios. Making sure that the brush is clean, because any phthalos, like I said, they are very staining and very overpowering. Aqua green is a permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating, and transparent color. Oh, this is going on the buy list. By getting this sheet might have been a bad idea, but also a very good one because I know what I want now. That is beautiful. I don't think the camera is picking up how rich the color is. It's a very kind of dark turquoise. Cobalt, turquoise, light, extremely permanent, semi-opaque. Usually when I use these, I will say that they are fairly opaque, and granulating. And like all the others, this is beautiful as well. I love this color in pencils and anything I have. It's beautiful. Cobalt turquoise. Extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating, and also semi-opaque. Cobalt green deep, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, fully opaque, and granulating. I use cobalt green deep and versions of cobalt green deep in forest paintings a lot. If you add it in wet on bark or on the forest ground, you end up getting a very beautiful mossy effect. But to get that, you have to go in wet. Let it spread where it wants to spread. It's a cobalt, it's not going to run away from you, but it will give a very natural mossy look. Cobalt green, extremely permanent, semi-opaque, granulating. Another one that doesn't have an ASTM rating, but it's cobalt, they're usually good. Oh, this is very delicate light green. It's kind of minty. It's the only thought I had of mint. The cobalt greens I have tend to be darker than this. Winsor green blue shade. So a phthalo green. Absolutely a phthalo green. I don't know if I went through the list, but it is a permanent, excellent light fastness and staining colors. Most of your phthalos, I would say all of your phthalos and your quinacridones are staining. So if you work with lifting, it's a lot easier to work around lifting with granulating colors. They tend to lift very easily. Phthalos and quins, not so much. This is Viridian. I have this one. I'm hoping it's the real Viridian pigment of Pigment Green 18. I haven't used the one that I've gotten yet. I haven't taken it into a palette. So this is extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, transparent, and granulating. And with it being granulating, it definitely should be. Oh, it's not moving at all. Now I have heard that these are hard to move from dry, which is why I haven't added mine to a palette. I have it in a tube. What we're gonna do is when I stop filming this and look for the pigment information, we're gonna add some fresh Viridian to this box to be able to actually move it, because this was nothing. It's hardly being picked up on the camera and it's hardly visible to the eye. Next one is Winsor Green Yellow Shade, so phthalo yellow shade. Permanent, excellent light fastness and staining and transparent. So you see the difference between your blue shade and your yellow shade immediately, just from brightness, and you can see that this leans more yellow. It's still a beautiful color, but I do prefer to have the phthalo blue, no, phthalo green blue shade in my palette. Gives me a little bit more mixing opportunities, I feel. Then we're gonna pull this one over again and change location for the water. The next one is Terra Verte. I'm not sure how you pronounce this. I have versions of this color in other brands, just based on the name. I have one from Lucas. So it's a extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating color, and it's semi-transparent. And it's also not moving. There's hardly getting anything. And like I say, I don't have this from this brand, so I can't add fresh paint to it, but extremely light. Now, Pearlin Green. I don't have Pearlin Green from Winsor&Newton. I have very few colors from Winsor&Newton. I have Pearlin Green from Schminka and Pearlin Green Deep, I believe, from Roman Schmal. Wonderful, wonderful colors for shades in any kind of like foresty situation. So it's a permanent staining, transparent paint. And like with the other ones, very pretty. If it's like, if it has the same similarities as the ones I have from Roman Schmal and Schminka, it has a noticeable drying shift. So if you want to have a dark shade color from this, you have to go in with a fairly heavily mixed paint. It will turn a lot lighter than what you're putting down. Oxide of chromium, chromium oxide, as I've usually seen it. extremely permanent, staining, excellent light fastness, and opaque. It's very typical to your chromium oxides. Hooker's green. This is a green I tend to have on my palette if I have a palette with many greens. Often I just mix them. This is a beautiful green at least in Rembrandt, which is the paint I have it from, but also in colored pencils. This tend to be a very beautiful color. This is a permanent, staining, excellent light fastness, transparent color. This is a little bit brighter or more yellow leaning than the Rembrandt version. Permanent sap green, a permanent excellent light fastness, staining, and transparent color. I have trouble with some of these with getting good mass tone, and it could be the size of the paint sample, but this is a lot more delicate than the sap green I have Rembrandt sap green. Olive green, permanent, very good light fastness, staining, and transparent. This is moving easier, getting soft, I feel. I love olive greens. If we can get darker mass tone. In general, the olive greens tend to be very natural colors, the kind of natural greens you'll get from nature. Terra Verte, yellow shade. Let's see if it does more than the ordinary version. It's not doing much. This can be just because the paint is very light. Rub it more and see if we can get stronger mass tone. That's about as much as I'm able to get it to do. Green gold. I have green gold from Roman Schmoll in a set, and I have rich green gold from Daniel Smith, and I love them a lot. This one reminds me more of the rich green gold. Beautiful, beautiful color. It's a permanent and transparent color. I think I forgot to go through Terra Vertex colors, and it's a extremely permanent, granulating, extremely light fast. This is very much like the rich green gold from Daniel Smith. Naples yellow, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. Very pretty, soft Naples yellow. Naples yellow deep, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness and opaque. I'm sure you can see how opaque it is just from the camera. Changing positions. Yellow ochre light, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, semi-opaque. It is harder to get a good mass tone from this one as compared to the Naples Yellow Deep. If you want a version that will give you a better mass tone, then I would probably, they seem very similar to me, go for the Naples Yellow Deep instead, even though I don't know the pigment of it. Yellow ochre, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, semi-opaque. It's giving a stronger mass tone than the yellow ochre light. Raw sienna, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, granulating and transparent. And it is moving easier than my current raw sienna, which is a Daniel Smith raw sienna. And maybe I was just unlucky with mine, but it is hard to move from dry. And I do prefer to use my paints from dry. Gold ochre, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, staining, and semi-transparent. Very pretty and so much more pigment than some of the other colors that we've been struggling with today. Because some of them have been a struggle. Quinacridone Gold. Permanent, staining, transparent. I love every quinacridone gold I have met. And I'm gonna love this one too. Let's see if we can get a kind of reddish tint in the mass tone. Yes. It's such a honey color to me. I really enjoy it. Brown ochre is extremely permanent. It is excellent light fastness and it is semi-transparent. Magnesium brown, extremely permanent, opaque. It doesn't say granulating on it. I have had some magnesium browns that have been very granulating, so we'll see. Burnt sienna, extremely permanent, transparent, and excellent light fastness. Burnt siennas come in a lot of varieties and a lot of different pigment blends, so I'm interested in what Winsor&Newton is using for theirs. It is not as strong off immediately as the one I'm using currently in my palette. I have, in my main palette, I have Daniel Smith's Burnt Sienna, and then I also have a Burnt Sienna from Roman Schmoll in another palette, and they are a little bit heavier. Light red, extremely permanent, and semi-opaque. I like this one, but again, it's fairly delicate. It's hard to see how it's semi-opaque. But again, I don't have a big black line going through these. So Venetian red, extremely permanent, staining, excellent light fastness, and opaque. And that's a beautiful and typical Venetian red, very heavy, but not as heavy as some that I've seen. I find it a bit difficult as a color because it is so heavy that you have to be very careful with the mixes. Changing. Oops, my water position. Indian red, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. A little cooler than the Venetian red. Brown matter, staining, permanent and semi-transparent. I have this one in a small tube from Winsor&Newton, and it is very beautiful color. Can't remember how dramatic the drying shift is, but we'll see as this dries, because it's very vibrant now. Potter's Pink. This is one of my favorite colors, but I only have it from Schminka. And I've heard that the Winsor&Newton Potter Pink is harder to move. I'll try to get it a little bit more intense in its mass tone. Beautiful granulation. A lot of the super granulating paints from Schminka contains Potter Pink. Perylene Maroon is a permanent staining and transparent color. If I missed saying it on Potter's Pink, it's extremely permanent and granulating and semi-opaque. So, Perylene Maroon. Yeah, I have Perylene Maroon in my palette from Winsor&Newton. I have a version made for pans. I've been told that the versions for tubes and pans does have some differences in formula, and this will have a drying shift, but it's a very beautiful, very blood red color, and I have used it to paint scary vampires. Not sure if they were very scary, but that's what I've used it to. Perylene Violet. is a permanent staining, excellent light fastness, transparent color. It's such a difference among these paints, which ones you can move quickly, which ones that will have to have a lot of work. Caput Mortem Violet is a extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, staining, opaque color. I really enjoy these kinds of colors. The very ruddy earth. I've gotten a few paint drops over here. We're going to take them away. There. Okay, so next up is Raw Umber. It is an extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, transparent color. Burnt Umber, extremely permanent, transparent, excellent light fastness. I'm gonna have to do a quick pause because of the battery on my phone. Okay, we're back. I used my little pause to also go get the Viridian I had. Unfortunately, it's not in a tube. It's in a half pan. And pans and Viridian PG18s tend to not move as much, but we are going to try to see if we can get a brighter color than the Viridian we got there, because that's not even visible. So yep. There. We'll let that dry and we'll look at it in the end. But at least that gives us a better understanding of that paint. Okay, so we were here at Van Dyke Brown, which is a extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, staining and semi-transparent paint. Then we have Sepia, which is an extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, opaque color. This is a color that seems to have a lot of different pigments in it depending on brand. I don't think the one I have is considered opaque, so it's interesting. And then we're on our last line. Let me just shift things a little. So that's absolutely the wrong place to be. It's underneath my computer. Let's see. There we go. Okay, starting with another color I really enjoy. I have it in from some other brands, but not from Winsor&Newton, and this is the Indigo. It is a permanent. I have to move it. It was blocking the coding explanation up here. Permanent, opaque, very good light fastness, staining color. Oh, and it is beautiful. Just ink. Beautiful, beautiful ink. Payne's Gray is next up. It's permanent, it has very good light fastness, it's staining, and it is semi-opaque. And I'm hoping that it's blue leading. Yes, it is, and it's beautiful. I really, really enjoy Payne's Grays. Apart from the ones that are gray leaning, I want them to have the blue in them. Okay, neutral tint is permanent, very good light fastness, staining, and opaque. This is very purple. Oops, hold on. Stop it. You don't need intermingling. Thank you. Very purpley leaning. That's pretty. I don't have any neutral tints. Maybe I need to get one. Ivory black. Extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, and opaque. Lamp black is extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, and also opaque. And then we have the black that I keep in my palette, not from Winsor&Newton though, but the pigment that is used for Mars black is pigment black 11, and it's highly granulating, and you can put this into any other paint, but especially your very staining like Quins and Talos, and you will get a very beautiful result. So it is a highly granulating. Usually this doesn't say granulating, so we'll see what it turns out to be. Extremely permanent, opaque. This one says that hasn't been my experience usually. And excellent light fastness. We'll see when it dries. It's odd to me to have something you call Mars black and not have a granulating Mars black. Davis gray is extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, semi-opaque paint. And like some of the other lighter colors, this is also having a hard time showing up. I'll work it a little bit more. but this isn't doing much. So we'll paint these two out. They're not gonna show up much. I'm gonna pull them over the lines. But this is the Chinese white, extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, semi-opaque. I'm gonna pull it as much over these lines as I can. And I can see a little bit, but not much. And also with this one being semi-opaque, it's not going to do much. Usually, if you have any kind of white in your watercolor sets, you tend to go for as opaque a white as possible so you can use it for highlights or for mixing pastels. This is not showing up much, but we'll see as it dries. Titanium white is extremely permanent, excellent light fastness, and fully opaque. And this one I can actually see on the page a little bit. I mean, usually I wouldn't use a watercolor ordinary white. I have a gouache that I use to kind of do what I need to do for adding white. There. We're gonna let these dry. I'm gonna go find the Winsor&Newton page with pigment information. And when it's dry, we're gonna go through the paints and talk about the pigments and what they look like dry, because there tends to be a lot of things that will show up better as the paints have dried. So I'll see you again in a little bit. Okay, we're back, and I now have most of the pigment information. Anything that has cadmium free on it, I couldn't find pigment information for, but most of the other things I have found. So we're starting up with lemon yellow is pigment yellow 53. Bismuth yellow is pigment yellow 184. Cadmium lemon is pigment yellow 35. Couldn't find anything for the cadmium free lemon. Winsor lemon is pigment yellow 175. Winsor yellow is pigment yellow 154. Lemon yellow deep is pigment yellow 159. And we're also going to just use this to look at them all now that they're dried. Orlin is pigment yellow 140. Transparent yellow is pigment yellow 150, so it's the nickel azo yellow. Cadmium yellow pale is pigment yellow 35. So this is a cadmium free, couldn't find the information. Turner's yellow is pigment yellow 216. Now, New Gamboge. That comes up with 2, and it depends on which version you have. One is pigment yellow 153, and the other is pigment yellow 150 and pigment red 209. And from looking at this, I would guess that this is the new version that is the pigment yellow 150 and pigment red 205. Cadmium yellow is pigment yellow and pigment orange 20. This is another cadmium free, so I don't have the information. Winsor yellow deep is pigment yellow 65. Indian yellow is pigment yellow 130 and pigment orange 62. Cadmium yellow deep is pigment yellow 35 and pigment red 108. Pigment red you will see in all the other cadmium reds. And as you've seen, pigment yellow 35 is the cadmium yellow pigment. Cadmium orange is pigment yellow 35 and pigment red 108. Cadmium free orange, we don't have the information for. Winsor orange is pigment orange 64. Transparent orange is pigment orange 107. Winsor orange is pigment orange 73. Cadmium scarlet is pigment red 108. Cadmium free scarlet couldn't find the information. Which bothers me a little, that you can't find the information easily. I've been on Jane Blundell's sites, I've been on Winsor&Newton's own sites and looked in on the specific colors, but there were several that I couldn't find. And I want to know the pigments usually when I buy a paint. Scarlet Lake is pigment red 188. Cadmium red is pigment red 108. Again, cadmium free red, don't know. Cadmium red deep is pigment red 108. And as you see, both from the pigment yellow 35 and the pigment red 108, you get a variety of these colors from one pigment. And you'll see it, especially when we get into the browns with pigment red 101 that spans a lot of colors. Cadmium free deep, another one with no information. Winsor red, pigment red 254. Rose Doré, now you see it in its dried version, shows up better than it did as wet. Pigment violet 19 and pigment yellow 97. Quinacridone red is pigment red 209. Winsor red deep is pigment red 264. Permanent alizarin crimson is pigment red 206. Alizarin crimson is pigment red 83. Permanent carmine I didn't find. I'll do another look later, but I couldn't find it when I was looking. Permanent rose is pigment violet 19. Rose madder genuine is NR9, and I can't remember what NR stands for, if it's like not rated or something, but now we're going into the Opera Rose. So the Opera Rose has pigment red 122, and you'll see it's the same pigment as your quinacridone magenta. So I'm thinking that when the neon, which is what's going to fade here, that doesn't show up well on camera, but it is a extremely bright rose color. When that fades, I think you'll be left with a version of this which doesn't fade. So you can use your Opera Rose and you'll end up with a painting that's gonna shift but not fade, which is kind of fascinating. Permanent magenta is pigment violet 19. Cobalt violet is pigment violet 14. And permanent mauve is pigment violet 16. Quinacridone violet is pigment violet 55. Ultramarine violet is pigment violet 15. Winsor violet, the Diaxoson violet is pigment violet 23. Indanthrene blue is pigment blue 60. Cobalt blue deep is pigment blue 74. French ultramarine is pigment blue 29. Smalt is pigment violet 15. So it's the same pigment as the ultramarine violet, just a different shade. Ultramarine green shade is pigment blue 29. So it is your normal ultramarine. And I can see blooming. I'm not sure if I can see granulation. Cobalt blue is pigment blue 28. Winsor blue is pigment blue 15. It doesn't say which variety because there are pigment blues from pigment blue .1 to, I think, pigment blue .6. Antwerp blue is pigment blue 27, as is Prussian blue. So these are just different varieties of the same pigment. Winsor blue is pigment 15. Cerulean blue is pigment 36. Oh, sorry, cerulean blue red shade is pigment 36, whilst ordinary cerulean blue is pigment blue 35. Manganese blue hue is pigment blue 15, so it's just the granulating version of a phthalo blue. Pigment blue 16 is phthalo turquoise. Now the aqua green, again, doesn't have pigments on Winsor&Newton's page, but what it says under pigment codes is phthalo. So I'm guessing that this is a mix of your phthalo blue and your phthalo green. And I'm not entirely sure on the ratios in this mix to get this color. I'm gonna test it out. Cobalt turquoise light is pigment blue. No, sorry, pigment green 50. Cobalt turquoise is pigment blue 36. Cobalt green deep is pigment green 26. Cobalt green is pigment green 50. So you see these two, the turquoise light and cobalt green, is the same pigment. Another excellent show of how different one pigment can be depending on how you treat it. Winsor blue green shade is pigment green 7, your ordinary phthalo. Viridian, now that we got it, you see the difference from when I found it from a pan, and difference it made from what we had here. And I think that what we had here was tube color. And I know that there are differences in how they react to re-wetting, and I've heard that Winsor&Newton has a lot of differences with that. But as you can see, it re-wets really well from their pans. So maybe if you don't want to use a tube, go with the pan. Winsor green yellow shade is PG pigment green 36. Terra Verte is a mix of pigment green 18, which is the same as the Viridian, and we had so much trouble getting the Viridian from that paint dot to do anything. So I'm guessing that might be one of the reasons why this is so faint. Pigment green 23 and pigment blue 28. So your cobalt blue. Praline green pigment black 31. Oxide of chromium or chromium oxide is pigment green 17. Hooker's green is a mix between pigment green 36 and pigment orange 49. Permanent sap green is a mix between pigment green 36 and pigment yellow 101. No, 110, sorry. Olive green is pigment yellow 42 and pigment green 7. So pigment yellow 42 is raw sienna, and pigment green 7 is your phthalo green. Terra Verte yellow shade is pigment green 23, again one that didn't do much on the paper from that dot sample. Green gold is pigment yellow 129. Naples yellow is pigment white 6, which is your titanium white, and pigment brown 24. And here on Naples yellow deep, it's all pigment brown 24. So that's probably the pigment as strong as you get it. So yellow ochre light, I'm gonna to solve this. Let's do a little bit of a bend in the paper so I can get this closer up to the camera. Okay. Yellow ochre light is pigment yellow 43. Yellow ochre is pigment yellow 43. Raw sienna is pigment yellow 42 and pigment red 101. Gold ochre is pigment yellow 42. Quinacridone gold is a mixed color between pigment red 206 pigment yellow 150, and pigment violet 19. Brown ochre is pigment brown 7. Magnesium brown is pigment yellow 119, and I'm not entirely sure why it said that, but it said that. I'm not too familiar with magnesium brown, but I still think that this seems granulating. And I also saw that Jane Blundell has marked this as a granulating one. Burnt sienna is pigment red 101. Light red is pigment red 102. Venetian red is pigment red 101. Indian, please focus, thank you. Red is pigment red 101. Brown madder is pigment red 206. Potter's pink is pigment red 233. Perylene maroon is pigment red 179. Perylene violet is pigment violet 29. Caput mortuum violet is pigment red 101. I'm sure you're seeing now the huge varieties in pigment red 101. Raw umber is pigment brown 7. Burnt umber is pigment brown 7, pigment red 101, and pigment yellow 42. Van Dyke brown is pigment black 6 and pigment red 101. Sepia is pigment black 6 and pigment red 101. Indigo. The 3 next ones are all the same pigment, but clearly in different ratios. Pigment black 6, pigment violet 19, and pigment blue 15. Usually, the pigment that there's the most of will be the first listed, but I can't see this mix having the exact same pigments as this one and not having more pigment blue 15, but they've listed it last. Payne's Gray is pigment blue 15, pigment black 6, and pigment violet 9. Neutral tint, it's pigment blue 15, pigment black 6, and pigment violet 9. Ivory black is pigment black 9. Lamp black is pigment black 6 and pigment black 7. Mars black is pigment black 11, and it is granulating even though they haven't said that it is. Davis gray is pigment black 6, pigment green 17, and pigment white 4. And then the ones you can hardly see is Chinese white pigment 4, pigment white 4, and titanium white pigment white 6. So that's all the colors from Winsor&Newton Professional line. Hopefully next time I see you, I will be able to show you a new purchase. I'm waiting for the last piece to come in the mail. They were sold out and they're shipping it later. But then hopefully we'll be able to look at some core paints. I hope you all have a wonderful day and get to enjoy your weekend.